Welcome to Unmasked, the CCI Anesthesia podcast, the show where we dive deep into the world of anesthesia practice improvement, quality enhancement, and the evolving landscape of healthcare. I'm Kieran Zumwalt, your guide on this journey as we explore the strategies, innovations, and stories that shape the future of anesthesia care. Get ready to be enlightened, inspired, and most importantly, unmasked as we unravel the many layers of the current state of anesthesia. This is Unmasked. Welcome to another episode of Unmasked, the CCI Anesthesia podcast. Today, we're peeling back the layers of the ever-evolving world of anesthesia service management. Our focus is on uncovering the nuances of management service agreements in anesthesia and exploring the shifts and trends that provide hospitals with increased control and flexibility. From staffing dynamics to negotiation strategies, we'll navigate the intricate details impacting the relationship between healthcare providers and anesthesia services. So whether you're a healthcare professional looking to stay at the forefront of industry trends or a curious mind eager to understand the inner workings of anesthesia service management, you're in for a treat. I'm Kieran Zumwalt, and together, let's unmask the trends and innovations shaping the future of anesthesia services. With us today, Alex Gorecki, who is the president of CCI Anesthesia. He has over 25 years of senior-level practice management and consulting experience with a focus on improving the operational and financial performance at nearly 400 healthcare facilities nationwide. Alex Gorecki, welcome to Unmasked.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Dr. Brian Schmutzler is on our panel today as well. Dr. Schmutzler received his medical degree and PhD from Indiana University School of Medicine. He completed an internship at St. Vincent Hospital and Health System in Indianapolis and an anesthesia residency at Indiana University School of Medicine with a special emphasis on regional anesthesia and ambulatory anesthesia. Dr. Schmutzler is the chief anesthesiologist in Mishawaka, Indiana, and regional medical officer for Central Indiana and Michigan with CCI Anesthesia. Currently, Dr. Schmutzler is actively practicing anesthesiology and acupuncture in Indiana and Michigan. Dr. Schmutzler, thank you for joining today.
Thanks for having me, and please call me Brian unless you're on my operating room table.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. So to start, can you give our listeners some insights into the evolving landscape of anesthesia service management and the latest trends shaping how hospitals approach practice management?
Well, we've seen a growing trend of hospitals struggling resource-wise, and that's the whole point of the practice management angle, is to bring those resources to the hospital and that expertise and that focused attention on managing anesthesia costs. Anesthesia is an expensive business to be in. There's no doubt about that. Reimbursement is getting squeezed for anesthesia in particular. And so it requires a growing number of hospitals to have to subsidize that service. And it's a very expensive service. So they're always looking for creative ways to manage their costs effectively without sacrificing patient safety and patient care. And so there's a lot of different approaches that groups take out there as to how they do that. Some of them look for efficient models. Some of them look for different billing processes they want to change, operational improvements. And so it's an evolving thing all the time within the industry as to what the best solution is.
Yeah, I'd piggyback on that. I think post-COVID, things shifted quite a bit, at least in what I'm seeing. In the past, there were a lot of independent groups, and with COVID and seeing the way everything changed, there's a decent amount of practices now bringing their anesthesia services in-house. And so I think that makes it even more difficult for those places that may or may not know what they're doing.
Absolutely. Before we talk too much about the future, I'm interested in kind of learning a bit more about a traditional anesthesia management agreement.
So traditionally, you have just a very simple model where a hospital would then contract, or hospital or surgery center would contract with an outsourced anesthesia group. That outsourced group, they have all of the providers on their payroll. They may be employees, they may be independent contractors, and that group is responsible for managing the service, for staffing it, for recruiting, everything related to that practice, including the billing side and the revenue side. Historically, those groups have kind of lived off that revenue that came in from the billing. And there was a time when that revenue would exceed the cost of services, and they were able to sustain their own practice and have it work financially. But as I mentioned earlier, now that reimbursement has gone down and they're having to go to hospitals for subsidies. The challenge is that hospitals are growing more and more impatient, I guess, with these groups, because we're seeing a lot of private equity involvement in some of these groups, and we're seeing a mix of priorities, some competing priorities between meeting the demands of the investors in these PE-backed groups versus meeting the needs of the providers and of the hospital, who that's the customer for that group in particular. The patients, surgeons, and the hospital are all their customers. And so they end up with this struggle between the two entities as to whose demands are going to meet. A perfect example is, let's say compensation has gone up for CRNAs within that market, and you're about to lose a bunch of your providers. Well, you can raise that compensation, but your profit margin might dip below 18%, and that might be a threshold that the private equity guys say, no, you can't go below that. And so now you're stuck with a situation where you're going to start losing providers, and you're going to bring in temporary staffing, locums providers that are way more expensive. And now all your costs are all out of whack at that point. The service has declined because you have revolving door providers, and it becomes a real struggle. And so hospitals are looking for ways that they can get more control over their practice, over that anesthesia practice, and more insight into the financial performance of the practice too. Because they rely on the group to tell them, oh, here's how much money we collected off the patient billing side. You owe us the difference, pay us. And that's basically the conversation. And they have very little insight as to what really is happening on the collection side with the different payers out there. They're demanding at this point, the hospitals are to say, I need to know more about what's going on with this practice financially, operationally, and they're not getting that insight from most groups at this point.
So you did touch a little bit about, why one of the traditional service model, and of course some trends and kind of why that needs to change. Brian, what would you say are some of the factors that are contributing to that need to change, not only on the hospital side, but also from an anesthesia group perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what Alex said. The cost of services, the cost of compensation is going up significantly, 20, 30, 40%. And the reimbursements are going down 3, 4, 5% per year from the government payers, and even more than that from the insurance payments. So, we've got to figure out some way to incorporate all that, be more open, be more transparent, and help hospitals see where that money's going, why, and then, how do we work with them, as anesthesia providers and as anesthesia groups to be more part of a partner, right? So we understand there's going to be costs, but how do we become a better partner for them so that they can see what's going on, they can see why it's happening, and then we can show them, this is how to be better from an anesthesia perspective.
Both of you mentioned the decrease in reimbursement and the added expense of the anesthesia providers. What are the trends that are driving both of those things? Why is the reimbursement going down? Why is compensation skyrocketing so much as it has been?
Well, I'll comment on the reimbursement side. I think unfortunately the payers have identified that as low-hanging fruit for them, because you can't do surgery without anesthesia, right? And so the surgeons are quite vocal if you squeeze them on the reimbursement, and their patients are as well, and they have that patient-surgeon relationship. Anesthesia is more of a support service within the hospital, and so you have this unknown person who's going to do your anesthesia for you, and I think the insurance companies recognize that, and they say, well, we'll just squeeze that because the surgeon is going to do his case regardless, but they need the anesthesia, and we can just pay them less money, and everybody just has to deal with it. And so they're seeing that as a place that they can just keep squeezing and squeezing.
100%. I mean, I'll add to that, coming out of COVID, I think it's a simple supply and demand issue. A lot of anesthesia providers retired. A lot of anesthesia providers said, I just don't want to do this anymore. And there were some anesthesia providers who actually passed away from taking care of COVID patients. So the supply of anesthesia providers was precipitously dropping, and the demand is the same or more with an aging population. And so, simple supply and demand, CRNAs, anesthesiologists are now demanding more money, which is increasing the compensation of these providers. What are you seeing, Alex? 25, 30, 40%, depending on the area?
It's dramatic. And because there's a shortage, they know they can make more money kind of being a traveler, a locums kind of provider. Mm-hmm. Why take less money to be a permanent base of operations kind of provider when you can just travel around the state or around the country and make a lot more money? I mean, frankly, in some cases, they can make as much money in 6 months as they would make the whole year. And plus, the training programs are starting to catch up a little bit. The CRNA program was extended an extra year. It used to be a 2-year, now it's a 3-year program. And so that kind of delayed the whole market in terms of getting new providers out there. And if you have more people retiring faster than you have people coming out of school, obviously you end up with a deficit there. And so that's where we find ourselves at the moment. So, but groups like ours are working hard to have a lot of outreach to those providers, create really good working environments for them, give them good opportunities, good pay, but also good opportunities to work within a good practice to where they can really work at the top of their skill set and get the most out of their training. And that's really what they got into this for anyway.
Mm. What we do well is we think of creative ways to set up systems within our practices where you may work with us for 30 weeks a year, 39 weeks a year. And then if you want to take those other 20, 22, however many weeks and do locums work and make a bunch of money that way, we're okay with that. So I think you have to be creative in the way that you set up a practice so that the anesthesia providers don't always think, oh man, if I just did locums, I'd make so much more money. There's something there, culture, flexibility, great places to work that they'll stay.
And so we have a situation where there's, especially the very large, big box, I guess you would call them practice management groups, that may not be as accommodating or may not be working as hard to try and do that. And what we have is situations where, let's say I'm a hospital CEO and I have 30, 40, 50 plus anesthesia providers in this group that I've outsourced to a company. I'm kind of held captive right now because if these guys are understaffed or they have poor leadership or they have, they're not doing well on the reimbursement side and the subsidies going up and up and up, what am I supposed to do? Because the days of just doing a wholesale change and pulling out 40 providers and putting 40 new ones in, you can't do that. As we talked about, the market is just really tough right now. And so they're struggling to find options. The good news is there are options. Our group has identified different options to help hospitals kind of have that plan B to be able to get in there and help them resolve that and put them back in the driver's seat within their anesthesia service line rather than being held captive. And they've been pretty happy with it. It gives them a lot of control.
Excellent. That's a perfect segue. I want to talk a little bit about empowering hospitals, as you just mentioned. There is a significant focus on empowering hospitals with having greater control. How are current trends in the anesthesia service management providing hospitals with increased autonomy over their anesthesia departments, particularly when compared to those traditional management models that we discussed?
Well, I would say we've spoken financially. So one piece of it is let the hospital do the anesthesia pro fee billing. We propose that a lot to organizations and say it confuses them because historically the anesthesia group captures all that billing. They keep it for themselves. And we say, no, we're doing the service within the hospital. That's your money, hospital. You guys take the billing revenue. You negotiate with the payers because you historically have more leverage and more negotiating power because you have multiple service lines in this hospital. And so you go out and get better payer rates. You work with those payers. You have those stronger relationships. In terms of having access to the providers and having the ability, most of these big groups within the provider contracts, they'll put restrictive covenants saying they can't work anywhere else. That happened out in Nevada where the providers were unhappy. They were concerned about being habitually understaffed. And it was on purpose because you figure, okay, if you've got a group with 20, 30, 40 providers in it, and if you could just drop 2 docs out of that model, well, an anesthesiologist maybe run about $500,000 each. You just dropped $1 million to your bottom line by intentionally understaffing that department. And so that becomes a patient safety issue, becomes a burnout issue for everybody else that's left trying to staff and manage that service. The hospital's upset because obviously if there's a bad outcome somewhere, the first thing they're going to say, well, we're understaffed. And there have been negative outcomes in that. Patients have died and some negative things have happened. But when the providers say, well, I'm going to go find a job somewhere else, they say, well, look at your contract. Yeah. You can't work anywhere in this market.
80 miles,
yes.
100 miles.
Yes, they'll have some kind of ridiculous radius. And so you're stuck either working in an unsafe practice or you have to move your whole family somewhere else to start a new job somewhere else, pull your kids out of school, uproot the whole family to do that. And that's not fair for anybody. I mean, if there's a problem, it should be fixed, not beating people over the head with contracts saying, no, you do it and you're stuck doing it this way. And so the hospitals and the anesthesiologists and CRNAs, they're all kind of fed up with this. They want other options out there in the market so that everybody can work in a more cohesive manner and have a better environment. Because when you have that kind of arrangement, there's no restrictive covenants on anybody. The providers are basically free agents and they're working within a healthy environment. You've got control over your revenue because the hospital, you're doing the billing now. and you've got great payer contracts.
Transparency.
Yes. And then you're not overburdening your administrative team in the hospital by having to manage this behemoth of an anesthesia service. You have a partner out there that's actually helping you manage that for you and take care of that for you, because anesthesia, Brian can tell you better than me, it's a complicated thing to manage. There's interpersonal relationships. It's outside just the billing and stuff.
Right.
You got attitudes between providers, between surgeons.
Yeah, I mean, just trying to figure out, how do you make a surgeon happy? How do you follow all the compliance? How do you staff appropriately, not overstaff, not understaff? How do you make sure that the providers get the time off they need? I mean, I got a call this morning that a provider couldn't get into work because of the snow. I had to shuffle stuff around to get a provider in. And so that's not something that, an administrator who's also handling surgeon practices, family medicine practices, and all that kind of stuff, that's not something they want to do, So if you have a dedicated anesthesia service line practice to help you out, those things get taken care of. And, essentially, I pride myself on the hospital and the surgeons never even knowing any of that happened, right? And so, I think what we do really well is we don't just say, here's our widget, take it or leave it. As a company, we do a very good job of saying, what can we do for you to make it work for you, right? It's not what works for us, it's what works for you, and then we'll make it fit.
Yeah, some of these creative service models we're seeing now, it kind of checks all the boxes for the providers, for the hospital, for the practice management group. Everybody involved kind of gets what's important to them, and it makes it work a lot more seamlessly. And like I said at the beginning, ultimately puts the hospital back in the driver's seat.
And even if the hospital is still employing the providers or contracting with the providers directly, we'll offer those services and essentially treat this just as if we were doing a traditional management program, but we'll do everything that we would do otherwise and have all that expertise for you or the hospitals, at their beck and call pretty much any time. So I think that's one of those unique hybrid things that we do as well.
Yeah, and having a good on-site practice management team is critical as well. What we've seen, there was a time when a lot of the bigger groups that do traditional outsourced practice management, they were more hands-on. Now it's gotten so disassociated. They just basically have providers show up, and then they're not really doing a whole lot at that point. They're not on site. They're not involved. They're not at all the different medical staff meetings, nursing department head meetings, just not there doing what they need to do and seeing what's happening on a daily basis. And they just have gotten, it started out more local, then it became more regional. Now it's become national. And that national reach is too far at this point to really be in tune with what's going on with your practice. And so it's important to us to have boots on the ground daily on site, actually being involved to know what's happening so that you can have a smooth running operation there.
We focus on local practices with economy of scale for our company to be able to support those local practices, I think is a lot of times what we talk about.
Mm-hmm. Revenue is obviously very important. It's a big issue nowadays.
I think revenue capture is probably the biggest thing that we can do as an anesthesia company. We make sure that we get every dollar that we're owed, right? We go back and fight every claim. We make sure that we document everything. I have conversations routinely with providers. Hey, you did an arterial line. Document the arterial line so that we get paid for that arterial line. So, I think that's the biggest thing. And then staying on top of the insurance companies in particular. Medicare and Medicaid pay pretty routinely and pretty honestly and well. The insurance companies, a lot of times you'll have to fight for every dollar. And so I think when we partner with revenue cycle management partners and vendors, we really push them, drive the revenue cycle, go back to the insurance company, get paid for that case. It's two sides of the coin. It's revenue, but it's also cost. So how do we optimize costs?
Yeah, and the big component of the revenue side is doing the right thing as well. That's why we ended up with this surprise billing legislation, because we saw groups out there that were just, you as a patient, you get a bill and it says it was a ridiculous amount of money, and then here was the allowable amount that the insurance allowed. And so they would get paid, the group would get paid that allowable amount, but then they'd send out another bill out to the patient and say, well, we want more money for that case that we did. And the patient doesn't understand. And then they're worried about their credit being threatened and all this stuff if they don't pay up. And the surprise billing legislation ended all that to where they couldn't send these basically balanced billing kind of arrangements out there anymore. And that's why we're seeing a lot of the private equity guys pulling out of the market, because the money's drying up. When they got into it, They were making millions and millions of dollars off of this and off these surprise billing things. And so that money is gone now. And you see these guys pulling out of the market now because they're not seeing the return that they wanted. And the FTC is really cracking down on this stuff now. We're seeing a big lawsuit down in Texas with one of the big groups up there that they basically bought up a bunch of smaller groups. And their strategy was to see which of those smaller groups had the biggest payer rates, the negotiated rates. And then they applied that all across all these other practices. And they saw, I mean, in Texas there, the lawsuit at least indicates tens of millions. I mean, at least $10 million that Texans paid that they wouldn't have otherwise paid before this PE group came in and took over. And so that was a strategy a lot of groups used to use, but the Federal Trade Commission is saying no more on this kind of stuff. And it's a two-part suit. There's the suit for price fixing, and then there's the second part of it where they basically they worked out a deal with another big competitor to stay out of their market. Mm-hmm. And that way they could monopolize that market. And so
I want to shift a little bit and talk about staffing. Flexibility in staffing, it's a rare feature in a traditional practice management service agreement. So how are current trends in the anesthesia service management supporting hospitals in retaining existing anesthesia teams or selecting new providers aligned with their specific needs?
Yeah, I mean, recruiting and retaining are, again, like I said before, some of the toughest things we're doing in anesthesia right now because of the locums market, because of the supply and demand issues. So, I mean, I think going into a practice, every time we go in, no matter what model we use, we want to keep as many of the providers as the hospital wants to keep and as we're able to keep, given, legalities and stuff. So, if you can walk into a practice and it's already fully staffed, we will do everything we can to retain those providers and make sure that things continue to work smoothly. I think that really helps in some of these hybrid models and some of these other things that we're doing where the hospital says, yeah, we're happy to keep those providers. We'll put them on our payroll, and then you come help us manage the anesthesia. So I think that's a big aspect of it. And then, again, recruiting and retaining, you have to be sort of creative in how you create these positions. I think we're willing to do that. So splitting time, splitting shifts, taking evening shifts instead of daytime shifts. You really have to meet providers where they are. And so some people want certain things. There are not a lot of people who want to go to work 46 weeks a year, take call every third night, and then get their 6 weeks off for the amount of pay that they were getting pre-COVID. So you have to be creative in the way that you recruit and retain people.
Yeah, there was a time when Brian would know better than me, but doctors especially would work 80 hours a week, not even had an eye at it. But the generation that's coming out now has different expectations of what they want work-wise. CRNAs are the same way. And so giving them appropriate time off. And it is a hard job. People burn out, becomes a patient safety issue. You've got to give people a chance to recoup and recover. That's why they don't understand if you have a model where you've got maybe an anesthesiologist that works 3 weeks on and then they take a week off and they end up with 12 or 13 weeks off a year. The CEO's like, that's ridiculous. Why does someone get 12 weeks off? Well, it's because this guy's working all night long and every weekend he's getting called in, and you've got to give people a chance to recharge. Otherwise, you're going to lose them completely and they're going to burn out. And then two, having good models, good supervision ratios on things, recognizing the skill sets of your providers. There was a time where you might see one anesthesiologist supervising 2 CRNAs, and they would go in, they'd start the case for the CRNA, they would end the case for the CRNA. The CRNA was just kind of monitoring it. And understanding now there's the capabilities of CRNAs have really, really expanded over the years. Some are highly skilled, and you don't have to do as much hand-holding with them. You can maybe have 4 or 5 of them out there working under supervision, and meanwhile, that anesthesiologist is then doing pain blocks, getting blocks done for orthopedic cases. They're managing patient flow, case flow throughout the day. They're managing the board, helping to make sure the OR is running efficiently. They're not bogged down in a case that a CRNA is fully capable of handling. And so recognizing the skill sets of all your team and playing to those skill sets so that they're maximizing their capability all day allows you to have a much more efficient model that's more cost effective and frankly better for everybody involved. Because CRNAs, they don't want to be babysat all day. They want to be able to work too.
How can hospitals benefit by choosing those compensation and time off structures and benefits that you just mentioned?
Yeah. So when I talk to a hospital administrator, usually what I say is locums. So full-time can be expensive. Locums is even more expensive. And then not running your operating rooms is even more expensive than that, right? So yeah, it may take an additional X amount of dollars to keep a doc or a CRNA around, but it's cheaper than losing them and replacing them with a locums. And then if you can't find a locums, not having your operating rooms run is very, very expensive because that's the cost generator of the hospital. You know, some studies say 85% of the revenue of a hospital comes through the operating room.
Yeah, as a hospital CEO, how much is it worth to you to keep the surgeon out of your office all day who's upset because he or she can't do the cases that they want to do because there aren't enough providers. And then cost-wise, a locums CRNA that's in there temporarily, if you annualize that cost of someone being there the whole year, you're talking $600,000. I mean, it's twice as much to have a locums in there and then an anesthesiologist is incredibly, I mean, it's over $1 million at that rate. Or you adjust your model, you maybe spend a little bit of money, but you have a much more stable practice and it allows you to then build case volume. It's important for anesthesia teams to be mindful that they need to be scalable. You can't just say, well, another surgeon is starting, so we need another provider. No, let's take a look at the block schedule. Let's work together as a team to figure out how do we do these cases within the existing structure, because sometimes there is excess capacity, and you just need to be smart about how you do it. But that's what hospitals are looking for in an anesthesia practice management partner. They want someone to give that advice. Most hospital CEOs are not clinical people. They're not even down in their ORs to see what's going on. They need somebody to help give them advice, because if it's up to the anesthesia person or the surgeon or the OR director, well, they're going to ask for the world. But they need someone who can say, well, let's look at operational efficiency a little bit here and figure out there's a better way.
Yeah, we treat every contract as a consultative service too, right? We go in there. I mean, every time that I do a startup, I go into the OR and I look, well, you know, what are the efficiencies, inefficiencies? Where can we make some progress here? So I think that's a great point.
If you're talking about support for hospitals, particularly regarding leadership and on-site practice management and recruiting, what are the prevailing trends that are shaping the role of anesthesia service management, providing hospitals with increased control over their teams?
So hospitals are increasingly resource strained. They just simply are. You have layoffs, you have restructuring. You rarely see like a chief operating officer anymore at a hospital. The chief nursing officer is fulfilling the role of a COO now. Their OR director, sometimes the OR director may be the floor nurse for the day or over med surg entirely. They are stretching people more and more than they ever have in the past because they're limited on resources. They're limited on funding. There's only so much money in the bucket for them to pay people and to do things. And the people they have are more expensive. Nurses are more expensive. Everything is more expensive in the hospital. So they're trying to do more with less all the time. And so the idea behind having an outsourced practice management group helping you do this is they're supposed to manage those costs effectively. Yeah, you have to pay a little bit more for that management fee that the group needs. I mean, they're not going to do it for free. It's not a charity. But the big costs, the provider compensation costs, the turnover costs, the opportunity costs of losing providers and being down rooms in your OR and all that downstream revenue you're going to lose from not being able to do those cases, or the opportunity cost of upsetting a surgeon because you don't have quality providers or staffing is inconsistent, and they just get fed up and
take my ball and go home.
Yeah, they take their ball and go home and go to another hospital somewhere else. That opportunity cost is huge, but it's an investment to make sure they get all that other revenue from all those other revenue streams that come in and all the downstream revenue from those surgical cases. And so having confidence in a partner that they know can get all that stuff straightened out for them so it's off their plate. They had so many things to worry about. Why is somebody in my office complaining about anesthesia again? They don't want to have to deal with that anymore. They want it all to work like it's supposed to so they can focus on recruiting more surgeons and building volume in the hospital.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the leadership that is offered and why it's so crucial to an anesthesia team?
Yeah, so we bring in, an operations manager. We call them RDOs, regional directors of operation. We bring in a clinical manager of some sort, whether that's a chief CRNA, a chief anesthesiologist. We have sites where we offer a director of anesthesia services, which according to Medicare, every site has to have. So we bring in all these things, no matter what model we use in a practice. And again, we take all that off the plate of the hospital. again, no matter what we're doing, whether it's a hybrid model, whether it's traditional model, whether it's, just helping the hospital with their employed model. And so it takes it off their plate. We also bring in compliance, which is a huge issue, right? If hospitals aren't in compliance with anesthesia, reimbursement goes down, you're at risk for joint commission issues. And so we just have a leadership structure locally, and then we have the company-wide leadership structure, both on the operation side and on the clinical side, where we help the hospitals do what they need to do for anesthesia.
Well, and talking about leadership, the chief of anesthesia specifically, or the medical director that's in charge of that team, so many groups will they plug somebody in and say, congratulations, you're in charge now. And then they're out there on an island by themselves trying to sort it out. You've got to invest in leaders. I mean, unlike Brian, I did not go to medical school, but my assumption is they don't have a lot of business management classes in school, in medical school. Zero. And somebody's upset about something or somebody's upset about somebody else or whatever, dealing with those kind of interpersonal issues. And so it's important, and something we focus heavily in at CCI is leadership development and investing in those leaders and doing a lot of ongoing training and development for those leaders. It's done, sometimes you do it in person, sometimes you do it virtually, but it has to be an ongoing effort, because the more time you invest in that leader, the better performing that whole department is going to be. I used to do a lot of consulting work, and what I found in most organizations is people don't quit their job, they quit their leader, right? Because especially if you're an anesthesia provider, if you're a CRNA, if you're still a CRNA, if you leave that job, you can do the same CRNA job somewhere else. If you don't have an effective leader that can rally that team, they're just going to quit that leader. And so it's critical to have that investment of that time and energy and resources into that leader.
Transition support, during the shift to a new model is very important. Mm-hmm. So how can you ensure seamless support during the contract transition phase and facilitate integration into new programs?
Yeah, change management is huge, and having effective change management strategy is critical. You can't just flip a switch and expect everybody to be happy and go a new direction. And so, anytime we start up at a new hospital, new contract for us, there's a lot of lead up effort, because we usually sometimes we get a short startup, but usually it's 90 days, 120 days, something like that. And so we're on site a lot. We go on site with those providers. We spend time with them. We interview them. We, we'll have dinner with them. I mean, just the mere act of breaking bread with them is a way to connect with them and show that we're a different organization than what they've had before. And they want to get to know the people they're going to be working with. It doesn't make sense to send out a person who they're never going to see again. Like, it's got to be the person they're going to be working with at the operations level that spends time with them. And so you lay out the ground rules. You lay out expectations. I mean, that's a fundamental piece that so many groups miss out on, is just giving them expectations and do it in writing and say, here's what it means to be a good citizen within this department, how to be a team player. And we all sign off on this thing and say, okay, we understand this is what it means to work at this place. And if they fall out on some of those expectations, now you've got a management tool for that provider and say, look, you said you were going to commit to this. Why are you not committing this? Let's figure this thing out. And you have to be willing to make a tough decision. If someone is just a difficult person, you've got to be willing to make a change there and move them out of the organization. There can't be anybody that's untouchable within the organization. You have to be able to hold everybody equally accountable. And so during that transition phase, leadership is key. You've got to have strong leadership.
We're running low on time, so I just wanted to finish talking about these trends that we've been discussing, and considering the dynamic nature of healthcare, what future trends and developments do you foresee in anesthesia service management?
I would say hospitals are looking for something new. They're looking for that unicorn out there, that hybrid model like we've talked about. It's going to give them a lot more flexibility, give them more control over their destiny. Right now, I think they've been held captive for too long and hostage for too long with what they've had. And so they're looking for creative solutions, and they're out there. They're definitely out there. We have a lot of them that we're already applying to hospitals and making things happen that have transformed how certain hospitals have been doing business for years. And it's really opened people's eyes as to what they can do differently and how they can move forward in a very dynamic manner in what really is an evolving industry right now.
They want a partner. That's what I would say. They want a partner, not a vendor. That's the difference that I'm seeing in anesthesia, big time.
Yeah, and I think recognizing it's not a transactional business relationship. It should be a lot more than that. And having those providers connected to the rest of the group and not feeling like they're on an island out there on their own, feeling like someone actually cares that they're in there doing a good job, because you have people that go in every day, they put in those extra hours, They do amazing things for patients. They save lives in there. And not that they want constant recognition, but it'd be nice if occasionally somebody said, hey, you did a good job today. That's what they're looking for. They just want that feedback. And so having that personal relationship with them is important. And it means something, because if you're disassociated from the providers and it's just purely transactional, if the hospital down the street's paying another $20,000, they're going to just pack up and go to that hospital. But if they like where they work and they like their teammates there, you're like, yeah, I don't really need that. I mean, I'd rather have a good work environment and be able to practice like I want to practice here. And so it's critical to build those relationships.
It's the difference between being a management company and a staffing company, basically. I mean, we provide white glove service, and that's what makes us, different.
Thank you both for being on the panel today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to getting together again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Unmasked is brought to you by CCI Anesthesia, leaders in anesthesia services for over 20 years. Subscribe to Unmasked, the CCI Anesthesia podcast today, so you never miss an episode. For more resources and information, visit the CCI Anesthesia website at ccianesthesia.com. We look forward to having you with us next time as we continue to unveil the remarkable stories and innovations shaping the future of anesthesia care. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.